Λοιπόν, ο κύριος Stoddard, Ρος θα λέω απλά, κατοικεί και εργάζεται στον Ντάλλας του Τέξας και ευτύχησε να έχει την ευκαιρία να δραστηριοποιηθεί ως επαγγελματίας πλήρους απασχόλησης διαμεσολαβητής επιπλέον των 35 ετών, έχοντας διεξαγάγει περισσότερες από 6.000 λέω, αστικές και κληρονομικές διαμεσολαβήσεις που αφορούσαν διαφορές συνολικού ποσού πολλών εκατομμυρίων δολαρίων. Πριν δραστηριοποιηθεί ως διαμεσολαβητής, ο Ρος απέκτησε με άριστα πτυχίο στη διοίκηση επιχειρήσεων από το Πανεπιστήμιο Southern Methodist University στο Ντάλλας και διδακτορικό νομικής στη νομική σχολή του Πανεπιστημίου του Τέξας στο Όστιν. Άσκησε δικηγορία αρχικά μόνος του, αργότερα με συνεργάτες επί 11 έτη και αφού υπηρέτησε επί 4 έτη ως μηχανικός στην αεροπορία των ΗΠΑ, αντιμετωπίζοντας διαφορές από συμβάσεις ως δικαστικός γραμματέας, δικηγόρος προσωπικού για τους διοικητικούς δικαστές του Συμβουλίου των Εφέσεων για συμβάσεις των ενόπλων υπηρεσιών και για συμβάσεις προμήθειας, ως βοηθός δικαστής προσωπικού, συνηγορώντας για το Κέντρο Συμβάσεων του Σαν Αντώνιο, επιπροσθέτως της δραστηριότητάς του ως διαμεσολαβητής, δημιούργησε και έδρασε ως πανεπιστημιακός καθηγητής σχετικά με 2 μαθήματα του έγκριτου εκτελεστικού προγράμματος MBA στην Σχολή Μονίμων Υπαξιωματικών. Τα 2 αυτά μαθήματα είναι οι στρατηγικές αποτελεσματικών διαπραγματεύσεων, θέμα το οποίο θα μας αναπτύξει και σήμερα δίνοντας παραδείγματα, τακτικές και ηθικές αρχές, πάρα πολύ σημαντικό. Οι τακτικές αρχές συνδέονται με τις ηθικές αρχές, όπως ξέρετε, και οι ηθικές αρχές με τις τακτικές. Δυστυχώς, ακούω πολλούς συναδέλφους να παραπονούνται ότι άλλοι δεν τηρούν τις αρχές που θα έπρεπε να τηρούν. Ελπίζω ότι αυτό σιγά σιγά θα απαλληφθεί. Επίσης, ο Ρος δραστηριοποιήθηκε στην διδασκαλία σε περισσότερες από 3 δωδεκάδες προγραμμάτων εκπαίδευσης διαμεσολαβητών από την Αμερικανική Ακαδημία Δικηγόρων Διαμεσολαβητών, την οποία συνίδρυσε, είναι συνιδρυτής της, το 1991. Την Ένωση Δικηγόρων Διαμεσολαβητών, όπου αρχικά δραστηριοποιήθηκε ως αρχικός διευθυντής και στέλεχος του 1991, καθώς και σε πολυάριθμα άλλα συνέδρια δικηγορικών συλλόγων ενώσεων διαμεσολαβητών. Ο Ρος είναι συχνά παρουσιαστής σε διεθνή συνέδρια διαμεσολάβησης και προγράμματα συνεχιζόμενης εκπαίδευσης, τα οποία στόχο έχουν την προώθηση των καλύτερων πρακτικών των διαμεσολαβητών κατά τη διάρκεια της διαδικασίας της διαμεσολάβησης. Ο Ρος συνέγραψε το κεφάλαιο για τη διαμεσολάβηση σε ποινικές υποθέσεις. Βλέπετε, παρόλο που έχει ασχοληθεί με αστικές υποθέσεις και υποθέσεις κληρονομικού δικαίου, συνέγραψε και για το ποινικό, για να έχει σφαιρική ενασχόληση και γνώση περί του θέματος. Συνέγραψε λοιπόν το κεφάλαιο για τη διαμεσολάβηση σε ποινικές υποθέσεις στο εγχειρίδιο του Αμερικανικού Δικηγορικού Συλλόγου. Από το 2022 ο Ρος δραστηριοποιείται ως co-chairman, θα έλεγα, συμπρόεδρος ελληνικά, δεν ακούγεται πολύ έβυχο, του World Forum of Mediation Centers, το οποίο έχει ιδρυθεί από την Union Internationale des Avocats το 2001 από τον αείμνηστο Thierry Garbi. Η Union Internationale des Avocats εδρεύει στο Παρίσι και κάθε 9 μήνες σε διαφορετική χώρα λαμβάνει ένα σεμινάριό της. Το 2011 είχαμε συνδιοργανώσει με την Union Internationale des Avocats και το World Forum βέβαια, ένα σεμινάριο του World Forum εδώ στην Αθήνα, το οποίο τότε είχε θεωρηθεί το πιο επιτυχημένο. Ευελπιστούμε και φιλοδοξούμε ότι θα ακολουθήσει και ένα επόμενο σε όχι πολύ απομεμακρυσμένο χρόνο. Ο ΡΟΣ έχει αποκτήσει τον τίτλο του διαπιστευμένου διακεκριμένου διαμεσολαβητή από την Ένωση Πιστοποίησης Διαμεσολαβητών. Είναι παντρεμένος με μια εξαιρετική κυρία, την Τζουν, την οποία είχα τη χαρά να γνωρίσω και πραγματικά αποτελούν ένα πολύ ταιριαστό ζευγάρι. Έχουν 2 γιους, για τον ΡΟΣ είναι θετή γη του, αλλά τους θεωρεί γιους του, οι οποίοι τους έχουν χαρίσει 6 εγγονάκια. Αν θέλετε περισσότερες πληροφορίες για τον ΡΟΣ, μπορείτε να τις βρείτε στην ηλεκτρονική διεύθυνσή του, την οποία αν θέλετε μπορώ να γράψω στο chat, αλλά υπάρχει στην ανακοίνωση που σας έστειλα. Η θεματική της διάλεξης είναι Κορυφαίες Συμβουλές για Επιτυχημένες Διαμεσολαβήσεις. Στόχος αυτής της διάλεξης είναι να εφοδιάσει το ακροατήριο με πολύ πρακτικές συμβουλές, διότι τα θεωρητικά λίγο πολύ τα ξέρουμε όλοι. Τις παθογένειες, τις νομοθεσίες, λίγο πολύ τις ξέρουμε όλοι. Λίγο πολύ είναι οι ίδιες σε όλες τις χώρες. Χτες είχαμε μία συζήτηση ο Σέργιος και εγώ με τον ΡΟΣ και ακούσαμε παράπονα, να το πω σε εισαγωγικά, αλλά παρατηρήσεις σχετικά με την διαμεσολάβηση στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες, οι οποίες μοιάζουν πάρα πολύ με αυτές τις οποίες διατυπώνουμε εμείς. Αυτά τα οποία θα ακούσουμε σήμερα, μαζί με κάποιες περιπτώσεις τις οποίες χειρίστηκε ο ίδιος, θα μας διαφωτίσουν, θα εμπλουτίσουν την φαρέτρα μας με διάφορα όπλα τα οποία θα μπορούμε να χρησιμοποιήσουμε με ειρηνικό τρόπο, και αυτός είναι ο στόχος ακριβώς, να χρησιμοποιούμε με ειρηνικό τρόπο τα διάφορα όπλα, να αποκτήσουμε μια καλύτερη εμπειρία για την διαμεσολάβηση και να αυξήσουμε και να μάθουμε πώς να αυξάνουμε τις πιθανότητες των μερών να επιτύχουν μια λύση. Θα υπάρξει χρόνος για να υποβάλλετε ερωτήσεις στον ΡΟΣ. Ο καλύτερος τρόπος είναι να γράφετε τις ερωτήσεις στο chat αγγλικά. Όλοι γνωρίζετε αγγλικά, δεν πειράζει αν δεν είναι οξφορδιανά, όπως έχω πει και άλλη φορά, να τις γράφετε αγγλικά. Εάν πάλι δεν θέλετε ή δεν μπορείτε, που εγώ δεν το πιστεύω, αλλά εάν θέλετε μπορείτε να τις γράφετε και στα ελληνικά και θα τις μεταφράζουμε ο Σέργιος και εγώ για τον ΡΟΣ. Αυτά λοιπόν είχα να σας πω. Η επόμενη διάλεξη, η ημερομηνία της θα σας ανακοινωθεί προσεχώς μαζί με το όνομα του ομιλητή. Και πάλι σας εύχομαι καλή και ευτυχισμένη χρονιά και να είστε πάντα όλοι καλά και να βρισκόμαστε τις Δευτέρες το απόγευμα. Μην ξεχνάτε, Δευτέρα απόγευμα στην Ελληνική Ένωση Διαμεσολαβητών, όπως λέγαμε, Κυριακές απογεύματα στο φουαγέ της Λυρικής Ένωσης. Καλώς ήρθατε και πάλι. Dear Ross, once again, I want to thank you very much for being here with us today, although I know that you have a professional program which do not allow such deviations, if I may say so, but you have been so kind to accept immediately to make this presentation for us. And we all expect to take advantage out of it, to take advantage out of your 35 years experience, out of the 6,000 mediations which you have conducted and which are especially commercial and what is the other kind of mediations you have conducted?
Civil probate succession. Yeah.
Succession.
Yeah.
But there is another term which I was trying to find. and which concerned disputes amounting to many millions of dollars. We are very impressed because not for the amount of the dispute, because many times small disputes are more difficult than large disputes.
Yeah.
Especially when there are feelings involved. But anyhow, still it is impressive. So I will make a presentation of your bio.
Well, may I suggest, if you have gone through that in Greek, and our colleagues here obviously understand Greek, for me, it's not necessary to take the time to go through it in English. I would rather get right into the material because I would like to have our conversation have as much time as possible to discuss things, if that's okay.
This is okay for us because all the persons present here for the moment are Greek, so there is no problem about that. If you prefer, we can continue with your presentation.
I think that would be good because I would like to have the opportunity to not only have the presentation part, but also some conversation with people about this, various topics. And let me start off really first and foremost saying thank you, Catherine, for the opportunity, and Sergio for the opportunity to come share some insights with the Hellenic Union of Mediators. I've had the opportunity several times now to come to Greece, actually starting in 2014 when the World Forum of Mediation Centers had its conference in Thessaloniki. That was the first time I had an opportunity to come and visit with the mediation community in 2014. And then again, just this fall, Evie, who is on board here with us, had sponsored and created the Mediation Festival through the ADR Hellenic training hub in Thessaloniki. So I had a chance 10 years later to come back. And there I had the opportunity through Evie's permitting me to do it to share the introduction to you, Catherine, for the award that you received from the ADR Hellenic Training Hub for your many, many, many years of service to the mediation community. You truly are a pioneer in Greece, and we're blessed in the world, frankly, to have you and people like you who have seen the vision very early on and have carried that passion forward for many, many years. And it takes that for this movement to get a hold, and you have been just a big contributor to that happening. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much. Kind words, Ross.
Certainly.
I deserve them.
In fact, I wore my Hellenic tie that I bought in Vergina when we were traveling from Thessaloniki. We spent the month driving through Greece in the fall, and you have a magnificent country, absolutely a delightful trip. And it makes me yearn to come back even quicker, which we will do hopefully within the next year to have another opportunity to come back to Greece. So that y'all will know, and y'all is my Texas phrase, so you will know, this is in the form of a presentation, but I also want it to be a conversation. So feel free at any point in time, if you have a question for me or would like to have discussed something, if you'll put it in the chat, in English preferably, so I can see it as well. But if you're not comfortable with that, Catherine and Sergio can identify what needs to be discussed. This will be delivered in a series of bite-sized, discrete portions, so the opportunity to discuss things along the way is there, and want to mostly answer your questions and address your questions if you have them. That's the whole idea here. So what I'd like to do is I call this the top 30 tips for successful mediations, but really it's more than 30 tips, and there's a reason for that. I want to exemplify what our role is as a mediator. And just like in mediation, what you should be doing as a mediator is giving your participants more than they're thinking they're going to get. You want to show up with more energy, more commitment, more creativity and interest in their case. giving them more time than they thought that they would be able to get. Basically, the way we would say it in America, give them more for their money. What we want to create each time we do a mediation is an experience for people that causes them to say, gracious, that was really incredible what just happened. I want to do that again. Whether that's the lawyers that are the gatekeepers of mediation, whether it's the participants or corporations perhaps that are involved in the mediation process for the first time, we want them to know there is something here of value for them, and we want them to want to come back and have another mediation experience in the event that they have a dispute. So what's our objective here today? Well, this is an opportunity for all of us to gain some new insights into the mediation process so that we can make our very next mediations even more successful than we've ever been able to do. I think that's true of every continuing education opportunity that we have, and the idea is to continue to get better and to learn more, have more insights that create us being better at what we do as mediators. And as Catherine may have mentioned, that's really all I've done for the last 35 years is serve as a mediator. I am a lawyer, but I haven't practiced law in the traditional sense for over 3.5 decades. I was blessed to be born in Texas and to grow up and live in Texas, which is one of the first 2 states in America to capture mediation as a process to be used in our litigation system. And that's what accounts for the ability of a number of us to have full-time mediation practices for many years. And much of what I'm going to be sharing with you today is a result of experiences that we've had that create learning opportunities. So let's talk about what is a successful mediation. Think about that for a minute. It seems like most often we think of it as one in which the dispute's settled. Why did you come to mediation? To get your dispute settled. Therefore, that must be a successful mediation, right? Well, maybe wrong. And here's what I mean. In any given case, certainly a settled case could be a successful mediation, but that's not necessarily true in every case. So how would we define what is a successful mediation? And I look at it as one in which all of the participants, including the mediator, while we're working very hard, thinking creatively, being committed to the process, and spending sufficient time in the process, help the parties identify and decide whether or not there is a resolution which is acceptable to them at that time. And that's really important. We have to divorce ourselves from success being defined as a settlement, as opposed to success being defined as a process that is performed optimally. Everybody, if we would say, puts their oar in the water to move the boat forward. Whether it can achieve a settlement is not our role as a mediator. That's a role for the parties to decide whether or not they can resolve their own dispute. We don't have responsibility for that. We're responsible for the process. So if we look to the flip side and say that's the successful mediation, then what is a failed mediation? And I believe that's one in where a dispute that did not get resolved, even though there was a resolution that was there to be found. In other words, it could have settled if something else had occurred. And to the extent that we're responsible for some of that, as is everybody else, why did that not happen? Why did we not find the resolution that was there? Did we not work hard enough? Did we not think creatively enough? Were somebody in the process just not committed to it, to stick with it until we could find what the solution was? Did somebody have a time constraint that interfered with their ability, or they just didn't have the interest in spending the time necessary to get to a solution? Mm-hmm. It's one where the solution is there, but we fail to find it. that is a failed mediation, in my mind. So, ironically, and we hear this at times, a failed mediation could be one where the parties actually settled the case. The dispute was resolved, but the mediator was the problem, and the parties had to settle around the mediator. Either the mediator just didn't get along with somebody, wasn't going to work hard enough, was ready to quit, throw in the towel, as we say, before the parties had a full chance to explore things. The mediator may have listened to what one of the parties said of, I'm not going to ever do X, and concluded that if they're not going to do X, the case is not ever going to get settled. And there are cases where the integrity of the process itself is somehow flawed. Whenever that happens, the mediation process has not been successful, whether or not it settles. That would be a case where, for example, a mediator might start sharing information with another party that the mediator is not entitled to share, or some other part of the process was allowed to occur that we would all say as professionals, that's not a very integrous way for the mediator to behave. And even though the case settled, it's hard to take credit for that process of being one where it's, quote, successful. It's very important for each of us as mediators to know why we have chosen to serve as a mediator. And I ask you to think about that for a few minutes. What is your reason for serving as a mediator? It could be, for example, the joy of being in service to others. We truly are in service to other people when we're in our mediator role. And if you find that joy internally, that's a great drive for someone to be a mediator. Some of us just love working on puzzles. I often describe mediation as like a puzzle, except that it's dynamic. It's not static. It's not 2D, meaning laid on a table and puzzle pieces to move around. It's 3D or 4D, and it's dynamic, and there are things constantly moving that cause the puzzle shape to change. And our task is to help the people solve the puzzle while it's moving. I mean, think about that. What a unique opportunity to be able to work on something that is as challenging as helping people find a solution to their problem and to come up with a resolution. What we say in America, there are some people, for example, who have chosen to become a mediator thinking and focusing on, hey, we could make a good living doing this. There's enough mediations in America to be able to work full-time as a mediator, or at least a significant portion of your work. And some people think, well, this is really easy, so I think I'll just go do this and make money doing it. And what we've learned is that if your focus is on that, making money while you're doing this, people will pick up on that. Not as likely that they'll want to come back to you to have you serve as a mediator. But if you love the work and take on the challenge of the work, the money will follow. The good work you do will cause people to come back to you again and again, and that will be how you will generate your income from serving as a mediator. And to that end, we have had some people in America who have charged rather unreasonable fees. And we believe in following the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And by that I mean focusing on the fees being at a reasonable level, so that that isn't the focus of why people are there. It's almost ancillary to why they're there. The focus is on the problem that's their problem, their dispute that needs to be resolved. And that's what we want to help them work on. So when I say it's been your life, your experience living it, what do I mean? We often talk about what's the background or the discipline that a mediator should have or could have in order to become a mediator. Of course, many of us are lawyers, have been in the legal profession, and in the legal profession and in the legal system, many mediators do have legal backgrounds. Not necessary, however, as you all know. Many backgrounds can help people serve as a mediator in a particular kind of dispute. What's important is that we draw on our own life experiences. You really are preparing for your service as a mediator all along the way of your life. All of the collective experiences are available to us to draw on in order to serve the parties in a particular dispute. And I encourage you, when you're going into service as a mediator in a case, that you look back in your life and draw on those experiences that will help you with these particular parties in their particular dispute. Because quite often we'll have something that we can relate to that can help us. Key word in that sentence is self-determination. Always recalling that it's the parties who have the dispute, and the parties have the opportunity to self-determine whether or not they're going to settle that particular dispute. I came up with kind of a sort of a poem, if you will, where I say that as far as my experiences, I've been living for 7.5 decades, a lawyer for 2/3 of that, a mediator for 35 years, with a wife, kids, dogs, and cat. So what do I mean by that? Well, obviously, a longer life means more life experiences. So I get to draw on those. More than I did 25 years ago, I have another 25 years of life experiences to draw on. Happen to have been a lawyer for 50 years as of this year. And that brings a whole perspective of legal eyes looking at problems that I can bring in. And as Catherine had mentioned earlier, been a mediator for 35 years, and that's a whole different set of experiences to be looking at things. And when I note with a wife, kids, dogs, and cat, each one of those brings a variety of life experiences that we can draw on. If you have a spouse, or you have children, or you have dogs or a cat, and I do distinguish between dogs and cat. Catherine, being a cat woman, will know what that world is like. Me being a dog person, I'll know what that's like. Each one teaches you a different way of a relationship, teaches you different things, whether it's cats teaching you about independence or dogs teaching you about unconditional love, as we would say. Kids can teach us a whole lot of things, and we have the chance to draw on all of those experiences as we serve as a mediator. That also gives you the opportunity, as you think back on your life, to have a connectivity to people, whether it's universities or schools you may have gone to that are similar, whether it's problems you've encountered, learning that you've gotten from these folks. Those are what we share together with our mediatees during the course of a mediation. So how should you start a mediation process? Well, many times we focus on that and we think, well, I'll start that day with an opening session, or I'll introduce people, or I'll greet them at the office. But I would suggest to you that you truly have the opportunity to start your mediation process on a given day with your own belief and affirmation that when you wake up that morning, you are confident that an acceptable resolution of the parties' dispute to be mediated, it's not only possible, but it's probable. That's not a guarantee. You don't know for sure that it's going to happen. But if you affirm that you are prepared and that you are confident that you will be able to help them find that if it's there, then you're ready to do everything you can to help them find a solution and a resolution if there is going to be one that can be found. It truly does start with your mindset at the beginning of the day, not so much waiting until you're actually in the process. If you do that every time, you will have an even higher level of confidence. I often tell people, I'm just as excited about the mediation I'm going to be doing as soon as we finish this program. I'll be going into my office to do a mediation. Just as excited about doing that one as I was the very first one that I ever did back in 1989. The difference is I don't have the nervousness about how to make the process work, or will I know what to do or will I figure out how to go forward and help the people the most I can? Like anything, when we develop the experiences, we develop confidence, and we'll have that already there. The joy of mediation is the excitement that comes with knowing that you get to work with another group of people to help them see if they can solve their problem during the course of your mediation. And so what is the objective of the mediation? I touched on this a moment ago. It's really not necessarily to settle the case. It's to create that opportunity, that environment for the parties to reach a resolution if they are able to find one. That's really what we're trying to do with mediation, which is why we have to be careful to define success correctly. Otherwise, we become invested in settle or not settled. And our job is not to drive people to a settlement. It's to help them find it if they are of interest in finding a resolution. And we've talked about this. The participants don't fail to identify a solution when one was available simply by not doing everything they could do. Well, we talk about mediator styles, and I assume, Catherine, that y'all do that during the various trainings to see some are approach mediation in the spectrum of styles. Some think of themselves as facilitative mediators. Some think of themselves as evaluative, and there's much debate over which it should be or shouldn't be. There are beliefs that people have that one is right and the other is wrong, or that we as mediators are empowered to be one way, but not necessarily other way. Certainly there are others as well, such as transformative. But I tend to think of things as sort of active analytical is an optimal kind of style to adopt, rather than the distinction between facilitative and evaluative. So what you've got to do is decide what style works for you and what works best, and then be flexible enough to adjust to your participants. For example, some people who are very comfortable with an evaluative style, it fits them like a coat. That's exactly the way they should show up. And someone else who is more facilitative will be very uncomfortable trying to get into that role. The challenge for us, I think, is to see who is your group that we're interacting with and what is it that they need in order to be moved along to understand better their dispute and their possible solutions. And that's where our flexibility comes into play. I kind of think there are 4 traits of successful mediators, and I affectionately describe it as Papa. That's not a male-female thing. It just happens to be the first letters of what I see are critical traits that successful mediators tend to have. And I see them as patient, active, persistent, and analytical. P-A-P-A, thus Papa. So why are those traits important, and what do they mean? Well, patient, as we know, this is at least a definition of it. It's bearing provocation and hardship and delay with fortitude and calm, without complaint. How does that show up as us as a mediator? And being patient is perhaps the greatest trait that we can have. We have to be the very last one to give up on a mediation process. We have to be the one who, in spite of the anger or the annoyance or the rancor that may be going on, we have to still be there, pushing forward for the mediation to continue. Where this occurs sometimes, I find, is when I pull the 2 lawyers aside in a separate room to have an attorney discussion before we go back to the rooms with the parties. And sometimes one of them will become very belligerent and want to stand up or pound the table or start to verbally attack the other one. And then that one will give rise to a defense, and they'll start to get annoyed and communicating back in such a way that it's not going to be fortuitous for the process to continue. And there's often an interest in somebody saying, well, heck with this, let's just leave. And I think as the mediator, what we have to do is be very patient, stay calm, let that blow by, still remain seated, if you will, while this activity is going on until it blows itself out, dissipates, and then calmly have people sit back down and pick up with the discussion. Without the mediator maintaining that patience, those conversations would blow apart and it would end the mediation at a time when nowhere near has enough exploration occurred. We have to be patient with the speed or lack of speed with which people move. We know, for example, that there are times when we may look at what somebody is about to respond to a proposal, and we're thinking, surely they're going to make a significant move at this point. And they choose not to. They choose to make a slow move. They have a strategy that's different than what we might see that they would be most favored with. We have to be patient with them in that process to actually let them negotiate the way they're choosing to negotiate, even though we might think it should be able to move much quicker. I can give you an example. In a number of years ago, we had a mediation where both parties said, in the very first caucus I had with each party, and so you'll know, my model that I live in Texas and in the U.S. is largely a caucus model, where we may start with a joint session. We always encouraged it, at least for me to get my ground rules laid out. We ideally like the lawyers to at least communicate during the joint session. But in our country, unfortunately, the trend in the last 10 years has been away from that part. But nonetheless, we try to have the joint session where I have the opportunity to communicate back and forth with the parties. Then we go into caucuses, and most of the rest of the session is the mediator shuttling back and forth between the rooms, carrying information or certainly proposals that could be had. And I can recall one instance where both parties said, Ross, we're very interested in doing this in 2 steps. We don't need 15 steps today. We need to do 2 steps. We should be able to get there. We're very sophisticated. Both sides were. We're very ready to get to the end zone. So why don't we do that? And when the first side tells me that, I know then I've got to go to the second side and gauge whether they have a comparable interest. Having learned that they did, it was like, okay, first room, you were at $1.7 million when you came in today. What would you like to make your move? Because there was $50,000 already been offered on the table coming in. And they made a very good move. They moved several hundreds of thousands of dollars down, which was a great move. I go into the defense room, and they, like the first room, ready to move very quickly, made several $100,000 of increase in their offer. Very strong first move. Went back to the initial room, and they made another very good move, and they cut it down to about a $700,000 ask. And the defense made a very good move and came up to a $600,000 offer. This is in 2 moves. This huge gap had been compressed. And I'm thinking, this is going to be easy. This will be done by 11 o'clock in the morning. We started at 9:30. This is exactly the way they wanted it to go. I went back to the first room to ask what its response was going to be to the $600,000 that's now on the table in response to their previous $700,000 demand. And they said, well, Ross, we don't have any more movement we're willing to make. So what do you mean? Well, we told you we thought this should be done in 2 moves. And we made our 2 moves. We have no more movement that we want to make. They should take our $700 and pay it, and let's go home. So I went back to the other room on the defense. You have $600,000 on the table. They're not willing to come off the $700. Are you willing to improve your offer? And the response was, Ross, you're not listening to us. We told you that we would have 2 moves to make. We made our 2 moves. We don't have any more movement that we're willing to make. They need to take our $600,000 that we offer. Now, these people came in with a big gap. They have a very small gap, but nobody is moving anymore. So I had to go back to the other room and say, there's not going to be any more movement. Are you sure you won't take any off of your 700,000? And the answer was no, we're not willing to make a different proposal. I said, are you telling me that if they offered to pay you $699,000, that you would actually turn it down, even though it's not 700? And they said, well, no, Ross, we're not stupid. We wouldn't fail to take $699. We're just not going to offer it. Well, may I at least tell the other room that you're willing to take $699 if they will offer it? Yes, you can tell them that, but we're not going to offer it. I go back to the other room on the defense side. They're not willing to add more money to it. I asked them, are you telling me that if it took $601,000, you wouldn't be willing to pay it? And they said, no, Ross, we're not stupid. We would pay 601. We're just not going to offer it. So for the next 6 hours, that exact same dialogue was repeated, each time moving the bar $1,000 or $1,500 up or down, back and forth. Nobody made an offer. They consistently replied with, I'm not going to offer that, but if they offer it, I would accept it. And that continued on until finally, 6 hours later, sure enough, right around the middle, not exactly, but right around the middle, they looked up and realized they actually could accept the settlement. I think it was $648,000. That's an example of where patience on our end is critical. It's a process where the parties were ready to reach a resolution. They just didn't know how to get there. And they boxed themselves into a scenario where they weren't going to get there, but for the fact that we stayed with the process. So Papa, patient, active. So what is active? Engaged in action, characterized by energetic work. That's us as mediators. We have to be active. We are not passive. In our country, a phrase, somebody is just carrying the bucket back and forth of a proposal with no enhancement of information or insight into it. That can be done by AI. That can be done by something, you could hire the secretary to carry the ball back and forth if there's not going to be something active happening. As mediators, our task is to bring energy to the process and insight into the process and actively participate in that thinking about what the proposal is and how to respond to that proposal, how to react to it. We do that by being active, a critical trait of a successful mediator. Similar, persistent. We have to encounter the obstacle and keep looking for a way around it. I often describe mediation as an obstacle course. We start the day, and our whole mission is to hurry up and get to the first obstacle that looks like it's going to be very difficult to get past, so that we can figure out how to get past it to get to the next obstacle, to think again collectively, how do we get past that obstacle so that we can get to the next one? And it's a series, much like an obstacle course race in the Olympics, where we have to get over each obstacle along the way until we can finally get them to the finish line. And it's our persistence quite often that keeps that process alive. Many times the parties are ready to give up, they become discouraged, they see an obstacle as insurmountable, and it's up to us to tenaciously help them find a way around the obstacle. So from a biblical perspective, we'd say make Job look impatient. If that particular biblical story of the patience of Job is there, we have to be even more patient with the process. When the people are ready to give up and say, no mas, we've had it, we're done, we have to be the last one there, not the first one, not an earlier one. We have to keep having optimism for them. The phrase, leave no stone unturned, is part of how we live our life. We have to keep looking and looking and looking, because we never know at what point is there an answer that will actually serve the parties. And we want to make sure that we've explored all of them. So we keep looking for route after route after route in order to have them get there. And last of the PAPA is analytical. And again, this is really a critical part. It's part of our active approach to things. We have to use what we've been blessed to have as a brain to help these people see things differently. We have to break it down for them. They tend to look at things as a whole problem. And if we can break it down into elemental parts and help them see ways to get past each of those or to get value from those, much better chance that they will be able to reach a resolution. So what do I mean by check your ego at the door? Well, for those of us that are lawyers, our role as a mediator is not to be the best lawyer in the room. We don't come to this process as a lawyer. We come to it as a mediator. And it's not our job to have all of the answers that the parties may wish that we have, but that's not our role. We don't have to know what's going to be the result at a particular court activity, whether it's a motion for a summary judgment or a trial itself. I've yet to find the person that can actually predict accurately every time what's going to occur. We bring our experiences, professional experiences, to bear in the analysis that we're going to do. But this isn't a chance for us to puff out our chest and say, I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm the smartest lawyer in the room, I'm the smartest business person in the room. That's for the parties to have. Our role is to facilitate their getting to the solution that they need, to get their dispute resolved. And that's very important for us to always remember. It is not our dispute. It is their dispute. And it's their responsibility for the result of a settlement or a non-settlement. So when you break down the process of mediation, we think of it in terms of a joint session, which is a time to build trust, get commitments. And when I say commitments, I always ask that people have 3 commitments when they come into mediation. I ask that they be there in good faith. I identify what that means. It means open to exploring the possibilities of settlement while we're in the mediation process. We get commitments of authority. We want to know that people are there with the authority to commit the party to a settlement. We don't want them to have to go back somewhere and sell somebody on the idea of the settlement. We want the people there that can actually commit to a settlement. And as far as time, our 3rd commitment, we want to make sure we have an open window, or if there is a constraint, that we know what that constraint is. We don't want to be surprised by someone who has to leave the process. After the joint session, as I mentioned, we go into the first caucus. Again, build trust. Critical words for the first caucus. We need to understand where people are coming from. We need to let them vent or express their emotions. They've been sued or they're mad enough to sue somebody. They're upset, and this is their chance to get that venting occurring. It is not the time to contest them. Sometimes we find mediators are so ready to get into it that they want to start contesting a position of a party in the first caucus. Occasionally there are times when that's productive, but most often that's unproductive, because you will tear down trust as opposed to building it. We in America have jury trials, and we always hear someone say, I want my day in court. I want to go to the court and I want to have that jury hear what I have to say and go have my case heard. In America, about 97% of the cases will never actually reach a full trial. Pretty remarkable if you think about it. 97% will not reach a trial for resolution. they will get resolved some other way. And mediation has become the way where the vast majority of cases get resolved by agreement between the parties, not having the trial court or the jury decide for them. So this mediation process is, in fact, their day in court. The day that they'll not have otherwise, because it'll either be resolved in mediation or the court could eliminate the case from a legal perspective as a matter of law. We want to give them their chance to be heard and to actively listen, which I'll talk about in a second. And that first caucus, it's critical that we be ears, not mouth. They want to know they are being heard, and that's what we do in the first caucus. It's in the interim caucuses after that when we start to inject risk. And it's very important that that not occur until they've had a chance to get their story out to you. And when we start to inject risk, they then start to have a chance to look at their positions a bit differently. And we start exploring options and seeing what kind of movement they'll be willing to make in their settlement position. And of course, at the closing caucuses, when you're down to really talking about the nuts and bolts of a settlement, you want to get the deal closed. You want the parties to finish the task at hand. If a settlement is there, you want to get it memorialized and closed out. So again, from a joint session perspective, always make your opening comments, what we tell mediators to do, because you can establish your neutrality and help build trust with people. So what do I mean by that? If I'm in the room at the very beginning of the session and I have everybody there and I'm asking if everyone there is in good faith, and I define that for them, I go to each person in the room around the table and make sure that I've asked and gotten an answer to that question. Each time I talk about asking about authority, do we have authority? This party hears me ask them. This party hears me ask them. This party hears me ask them. They get to see and hear and experience my neutrality. I am treating people the same. I'm not asking this one something and not asking these people that. This becomes very important because later in the day, when you're asking the hard questions, the ones that raise the risk or at least intended to, the person may feel like you're taking the other guy's side. And it's important that their lawyer be able to help remember them or remind them that, no, if you recall, the mediator was probably doing the same thing in the other room that they're doing with us here. Because if you remember in our joint session, he asked each person the same question. He treated everybody with symmetry and the same way. So we have confidence that the mediator in the other room is doing the same thing that they're doing in our room. And those are the commitments I mentioned of good faith, authority, and time. I was always one to encourage communication across the table in a joint session. But again, I will say, at least in the US, very little of that takes place now. I think it's a huge loss of opportunity, but the market has spoken in our world, and there's just really very little interest in doing that. They want to do it through the mediator. They feel it's safer. So here's a tip for you when you go into your first caucus with folks. And what I have done for 3.5 decades is I ask questions first of the client. I want to know what happened. Tell me the story of how we got to here, where we have a dispute. What's the history that led up to that? That's the day in court thing. That's the opportunity to tell the story, whether it's an accident that has happened, whether it's a dispute over a commercial issue that somehow went awry, or if business partners that are breaking up, what is it that was good when it got started, but the way we would describe it, the wheels fell off the wagon? What happened? And secondly, what are your objectives? What do you want to accomplish in this mediation? By that I mean, is it typical that you want to just recover the most amount of money that you can, or on the defense side, you want to pay the least amount of money you have to? Or are there some other objectives that we ought to have in mind that open the door for a more creative solution at the end? That can come from the client. That's what the client knows. And those are objectives that the client may not have even expressed to their lawyer yet, but it's an opportunity to hear it. But after those two questions are addressed, then to the lawyer, we'll typically address the next 5 questions. What are the strengths of the case? The weaknesses of the case? The likelihood that the plaintiff prevails in the case if it had to go to trial? And what's the range of verdict or judgment that is likely to come out of the courthouse? What's a high range, a high kind of number, a low number, or a tighter range? What are they interpreting as the risk for their client if they go to trial? And the last question, what's the other side likely to do? That's a focus on what's their insight as to what the other party is in the mediation process. Have they been told things by the other lawyer? Do they have leaks of information that help them gauge or guess what the other side's there to do? If you'll ask those 7 questions in each case, you will be magnificently equipped to go through the rest of the process. These are anchors for you. So, for example, if a plaintiff is telling you that the range of verdict is likely to be $100,000, they're likely to win at the courthouse if they had to go to trial. And they start asking in the later caucuses, they start asking for way more than $100,000. Even though that's the most likely result, you now have an anchor to say, well, help me remember. When we first talked, you were saying you thought 100,000 was the likely result at the courthouse. Yet now, 2 hours later, you're still asking for 250,000. Why? Help me understand why that will make sense to the other party, because I need to explain that to them. And in fact, it probably can't be explained to make sense. And it helps that party adjust to a more realistic number because you anchored them at the very beginning of the session in that first caucus. And these are the same questions that you ask not only in the plaintiff room, but in each of the other rooms. If there's a defense room or multiple defense rooms, that same analysis. You want to get loaded up with how are they looking at the case, and how likely is it the case prevails favorable to the plaintiff or the defendant. So how do we raise risk? That's often a question. And I've said earlier that the job is knowing how to ask the right question. It's not necessarily to have an answer for questions. And this is fantastic because this is how you can mediate cases that you are not that familiar with the legal issues that are involved in the case, because you don't have to know the answers. It's helpful to know some good questions, but even with that, you can ask the lawyers, what are the questions I should be asking of the other party? And they'll readily equip you with the questions that you need to be asking the other party, because they're the ones they think they can't answer, and can't answer in such a way as to give them much comfort that the case has favored results coming to them if they had to go to trial. And we do that through a series of questions. So this is a distinction on the evaluative side versus facilitative side. If you're asking a question, you aren't so much giving your opinion on where something will be, but through your question, you are raising the risk for them that that answer may not be good for them. The one that they're going to have to tell you reflects that the case has some weaknesses in it. And we get that out through living in the question and asking questions. That's a way to protect the way people trust you, is they're not being undermined yet, thinking that you're on the other side, because you're asking it as a question, not making it as a statement where they have a, how on earth are you going to prevail in that position? A point on that, again, not necessarily that you agree with their answer, just that you get the question asked. The seed of doubt is what you're planting. You want them, whether they acknowledge out loud to you or not, you want them to have the conversation when you leave the room about the questions that you asked. So when we talked earlier about earning trust and respect, who are we talking about? Well, obviously, certainly the parties that are there, the lawyers that are there, maybe some experts that have been brought into the case for a little while during the mediation process, but also for all your referral sources, where your cases will come from, whether it's lawyers or staff or insurance companies or human relations personnel, whatever kind of cases you're working on, you want to continue to earn their trust and their respect by the way that you do what you say you're going to do. And that's part of it. You've got to keep confidences confidential. You always should do what you say you will do. We, as the mediator, are in control of the mediation process, not the negotiations, not necessarily the amounts that are being said. That's the parties, but the process is ours to protect. Again, we have to be patient, active, persistent, analytical. We have to be working hard. And importantly, we have to continue to follow up if the dispute doesn't get resolved. People often say, well, isn't the reason you have a successful mediation practice because cases got solved the very first day they came in? And that is true. That is a very beneficial thing that can happen to parties. But I would suggest that the reputation can be built really as much on the cases that don't settle as the ones that do. And by that, I mean your consistent, persistent follow-up is a critically valuable part of the mediation service that we provide to people. So use the language of we, not the language of me. What do I mean by that? Well, when you're raising risk issues in a private caucus with a party, if you adopt the viewpoint of that party, then it becomes a we. So if you're in the claimant's room and you're saying, how will the respondent's testimony affect our credibility with the jury? Hang on, got it. I'm concerned about how effective our rebuttal will be. These are team building words. We approach it not as I'm attacking you, but I'm in there with you, trying to understand how will our position be carried to the other side or to the court or the jury. It's a very fine line distinction, but if you can envision with someone asking you, how will this affect us versus how is this going to affect you, there's less of a line between the two of you. You become part of their team while you're in the room with them to help them analyze what's going on. It can be very impactful on their willingness to share information and insights with you. We've all heard the phrase actively listen, right? In our trainings, we know it's not just listening, it's listening actively. I've often talked to lawyers about, I marvel really, frankly, how lawyers go through and spend 2 months in a trial where they're there every day serving as a lawyer for the parties in a case. Whether it's a week or a month, it doesn't matter. It's just, you would think would be very de-energizing. And it is. But what's interesting is a lawyer, when they're taking the examination, the lawyer is on. And then when they're not, they're kind of sitting there thinking about what's going on and listening, but they're not having to be on point. We know this as mediators. We are never not on point. We are always listening actively. Even when the conversation is between other people in the room and not with us, we are still always actively listening. If we're walking down the hall to the bathroom during a break with one of the lawyers or parties beside us, we are always active listening. I often find that a true key to the case may come out of somebody literally on the way down the hall to the water fountain. their guard is down, they're willing to be more open with you. Maybe they're frustrated that they haven't been able to say what they want to say, and they'll have a chance to say it while you're walking down the hall or in the coffee room. We have to have our minds always working on listening on what information is being provided to us so that we are ready to use it and help them with it at the right point in time. So how important is it that we be optimistic? I believe that we have to continue to believe of a settlement possibility. And we have to be the one to find the good news in every move. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say somebody finally offers $100,000. They've been offering 30 and 50 and 70, and they finally offer 100. Even though the move may have been small from their last move of, say, 90 to 100, the good news in it, they finally offered 6 figures. They finally reached a level that maybe the case needs to get to in order to identify what a settlement can be. The amount of their move may have been double what their past move was. We see that. We can articulate that for people. So even though they may complain that they only moved $15,000, it may be twice what they moved the time before. So in this chess game that's going on in these proposals back and forth, we have to keep focus on and identify what is the good news in each one of those moves in order to cause the other folks to be encouraged to stay in the process. We can help people be okay with their movement as well as with their settlement. I have had many, many instances where I have felt very good for people that they have reached a point where their case can get settled. And I want to acknowledge that for them, to help them feel better about it. Sometimes in America, people will say, oh, a good settlement is when nobody's happy with it. And that could be the case. But I've been a believer that we want to try to help people be as okay with their settlement as they can be. And this is our role, to protect the integrity of the mediation process. There's a Latin phrase, veritas liberavit vos, the truth shall set you free. That's often placed above many of our courthouse doorsteps, because that's why we go to the courthouse, we think, is to have the truth come out. It is their dispute, the party's dispute, but it's our process to protect. If somebody starts to do something that violates the integrity of the process, we have to be strident in stopping that from occurring. That could be a scenario where someone wants to do something what we would call underhanded, or maybe somebody wants to not disclose a piece of information that's necessary and required to be disclosed, but to have a settlement based on that false state of things. For example, in the insurance world, there may be an obligation to reveal to the plaintiff what level of insurance is there. And that's done all the time. Occasionally, there is what's called excess insurance beyond the primary policy, where there is more additional insurance available to settle the case. And every once in a while, you'll find somebody who doesn't want to reveal that part to them, even though they're obligated to under the rules. And they want to settle the case because only the defendant at the minute knows about the insurance excess that's there. If the plaintiff learns about it, they may ask for more money. And the defense thinking, I don't want that to happen, so I'd rather have them settle under the incorrect belief that there's only this level of insurance, when in fact there's another layer on top. We have to be very careful that our process isn't used to defraud someone into a settlement based on a factual piece of information that they have a right to know, and it's not been disclosed to them yet. And we have to stop that. We have to stop anything that looks like it would affect the integrity of the process. How many of you think that you've ever had a lawyer in a mediation tell you something that is not true, or have ever lied to you. Not just the lawyer, but could be even the participants. We have to know that not everything we hear is necessarily all of the truth. This isn't a trial where they're sworn under oath to say the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. That's not what goes on. These are just statements that people make. And we have a phrase that I believe in very strongly, and that is, people don't tell you what they want. They tell you what they think will get them what they want. Now, what do I mean by that? If you have somebody that wants to settle a case for receiving $100,000, that's kind of the bare bones of what they want to have. They probably aren't going to tell you that at the beginning of the session. And you don't really want them to anyway, but that's not what they would tell you. What they will tell you is they got to have $150,000, even though they really need $100,000, because they aren't going to tell you what they want. They're going to tell you what they think will get them what they want. And if they come in knowing that they've told you they're only going to ask for $100,000 at the end of the trip, they know that that's probably not going to happen. It's probably going to be a lesser number. And this is the mechanism that people use to communicate. And frankly, we're all people. We do this not just in mediation, but we do it in life. There is a Hippocratic oath that the medical profession has. We adopt it as the mediation community. Above all, do no harm. There is no case that settlement is more important than the integrity of the process. And we have to be cognizant that how we act and communicate impacts all of the parties, not just the ones that we're talking with. So it's important that we always communicate accurately. We may not be able to tell everything that we know. That's where confidentiality comes into play. But what we do say has to be accurate. What do I mean by don't water barren trees? Well, sometimes as mediators, we'll see the risk for people, and they just don't see it. We recognize for them they have a risk of a position that is going to be very difficult to sell at the courthouse, and they just don't see it. At some point, what you have to do is move on. The phrase "don't water barren trees," meaning a tree that has no growth, no chance of survival, don't put your energy in that. Even though you know in your heart of hearts they should see it, you have to accept the fact they just simply aren't going to see it. And so you have to back up and come at it a different direction, find additional risk for them. Otherwise, they're going to become very frustrated with you, and you could start to lose some of that bridge that you've been building. I'm a firm believer in using humor to break tension. And when I say humor, sometimes mediation offices will have toys or gadgets that are on the table, or the mediator may want to use some appropriate humor at a particular point in time to break up the tension that's in the room. It's important, however, that you be cognizant there are certain kinds of humor that are good and certain kinds that are very high risk and shouldn't be used. Self-effacing humor is particularly safe. It's about making fun of myself. If I can make fun of myself or my own activities or whatever, that's fine. What you don't want to do is get into humor that involves race or ethnic or politics, religion, gender, sexual issues, something that's gross, things that you may have a particular kind of sense of humor, that some variety of those may be funny in a certain environment, you think. No place to take a chance in mediation. You simply don't know these people to know that they share a sense of humor about certain things. People can be very, very sensitive about certain aspects of their lives and don't find humor in it. And that is like stepping on a nail. You don't need to do that. You don't need to inject that and take the risk of a negative result. If you are going to use humor, you have to be very cognizant of when. It needs to be very short, and it's not a joke or a story that has length to it. These people are interested in getting their deal resolved. What you're looking for is something that might create a moment of tension and then let us get back to the process with that tension having been alleviated to some degree. We've talked already a little bit about this. I always use this rule of thumb when I'm communicating with people in a caucus session, for example, or walking down the hall. Whatever I say, I want to be comfortable that if that is repeated to the other party, that I'm going to be okay with that. So, for example, I would not want to be saying to a plaintiff in the plaintiff's room, boy, that defendant on the other side is a piece of work. They don't know what they're talking about. Or, gee whiz, they're really XYZ characteristics about them. That would be very embarrassing to me if that other party knew I had said that. And so the safe thing to do is not ever say that. Don't say things that you would be uncomfortable if it was repeated in the other room. Similarly, maybe the lawyers will be finishing up a case and they'll be talking with one another later. You don't want to have one of them be able to say to the other something accurately that you have said that would make you very uncomfortable knowing that they have now heard that. So guard your reputation zealously and always, always, always take the high road in what your communications are. So I mentioned this actually a little bit earlier of how to build your reputation. Certainly it has to do with results from cases that you expected would settle. That's another notch on the belt, if you will, that you have now served as a mediator in a case that's gotten resolved. But I would say that in my own particular case, and many of my colleagues that do this full time, we've built our reputation on the cases that don't settle during the first session. The ones where our insistence on following up and kicking the tires, as we call it, to see if they are at a more ripe time ready to discuss settlement opportunities. That's what they remember. It goes back to what I said earlier about a failed mediation and a successful mediation. Simply settling the case doesn't necessarily mean that the people think you've done a good job and have been successful as a mediator for them. They could get that easily from a case that doesn't settle, but your consistent follow-up with them is what impresses them. It matters to you that you be available to them all the way through. I always look at it when a case has been assigned to me, that's my case forever. I'm there if it goes through a trial, if it goes up to appeal, if it goes to a further appeal, if it comes back down for a trial, I am always on standby, ready to help them try to get their case settled. That will cause you to be someone who gets thought of when lawyers are trying to figure out who's going to be their mediator on the next case. Sometimes as mediators, we forget that the dispute belongs to the parties. And we start to become invested in a particular solution. We think a certain dollar level maybe is what they ought to settle for. We think a certain piece of the settlement puzzle needs to be included, probably be very smart for them to do. We have to back away from that and not become invested that become part of the solution. I tend to think of it as if I'm going to make a suggestion for something, it's just that. It's just a suggestion. They are absolutely free to disregard it, to supplant it with something else. That's their business. That's their case. That's fine. Let them determine what they want to have or the pieces of their settlement. And for heaven's sakes, we don't want to interject our view of fair in a mediation. It is simply not our role to gauge the fairness of what parties are coming up to. The process has to be fair and impartial. That's our responsibility, the integrity of the process. But the result, the settlement terms, really does not have to be fair and for us to judge that. The one exception to that, I might say, is if we happen to be mediating a case where one side has a lawyer and the other side does not. And our belief is that if that looks like a settlement is going to be so grossly unfair, we may want to call a timeout and say we want to stop the mediation process and say to everybody, let's let everybody get counsel involved if they want to. I'm just not comfortable proceeding with the mediation. That's the unique, discrete spot where an analysis of fair might come into play. But our view is if people have lawyers, they can have great lawyers, not so good lawyers. That's up to them to decide. But with their legal guidance, they'll make a decision on what they want to resolve things. It's not ours to judge that it's fair or not. And what we always have to remember is we don't know everything. We only know what we've been told, what's been shared with us. And that doesn't necessarily include all of the information that would make up why a particular settlement really truly is or isn't fair. It's just not our role to judge that. Bottom line is a state of mind, not a fact. Many times people will come into mediation and in the first caucus, they'll say, hey, Ross, do you want us to just tell you what our bottom line is? Now think about that for a second. They want to tell us what their bottom line is. Do we want to know that? Do we want to accept them telling us that? And if not, why not? Well, here's what we know. Just because somebody says it's their bottom line doesn't really necessarily make it that. They could be lying to us, misleading us intentionally, or they could actually be truthful and believe it at that moment in time, but are capable of changing their mind later. So here's the insight. If you let someone tell you early in a case what their bottom line is, say it out loud in front of other people in their room, in front of their lawyer, or their lawyer says it on their behalf. The problem is now, to change their mind, they have to back away from something that they have said is their bottom line. And there can be a face-saving problem there. Whereas if they only know it in their head and have never said it out loud, they can change their mind and we don't even know they changed their mind. There's no face-saving aspect to that. They just changed their mind. They now see something they didn't see before and they're willing to take a different settlement level. So we don't want people to lock in a bottom line, particularly because chances are it won't settle the case. It will be something that's less than or more than that, depending on which side of the docket it's on. So, mistakes. What about mistakes? Well, here's what I'd say. As a mediator, you're going to make mistakes. The key is to make minor ones and to learn from them so you don't keep doing them. What do you think is the cardinal mistake that we can make as a mediator, the one most likely to be really, truly problematic? And I would suggest to you that it probably has to do with breach of confidentiality. In our world, we look at what is liability for mediators, and for the most part, we don't really have a lot of liability risk serving as a mediator. The one area where we do is in breaches of confidentiality. When somebody tells you something in confidence without authority to further relate that to people, they are absolutely counting on you not to share that with the other parties. Whether it's materials they've given you before the session or during the course of a caucus, and they share information with you because you've been dialoguing with them, you've built the trust, you're now a receptacle of their secrets, you have to maintain those. It's critical. And they have to trust that that's what's going to happen. And it certainly is a mistake if you let that slip out. Give you an example. When I was a very young mediator, I was given several pieces of information. We discussed it. I had authority to relate several of those points, and I go into the other room and share those points. And while I share points 2 and 3, I shared point 4, realizing as soon as I'd said it, I didn't have authority yet to relate point 4. I had authority for 1, 2, and 3, but I just forgot that I didn't have point 4 yet and let that out. That was a mistake. The question is, how minor is it? That's not for me to decide. That's for the party who gave me the information to decide. And what do we do about it? And in that instance, as I would suggest to you in any instance where you've made such a mistake, is to discreetly, not at that exact same moment that you said the word, here's number 4, oh my goodness, I wasn't supposed to tell you that. That's not what you do. What you do is you get number 4 out, realize your error. A moment or two later, when it's not tied to that anymore, excuse yourself from the room and leave the room and go back to the room where you were given the information and share with them, listen, I just was going through points in the other room and I gave point 1, point 2, point 3. I also gave point 4 and realized as soon as I said it, I had not yet gotten authority to relate that. I need to let you know I have done that. And now let's strategize what we do about it. Fortunately, in my case, it was a minor information piece that was going to get revealed a couple of caucuses later anyway, and they were okay with it. Didn't cause any major disruption, didn't want to change any strategy of what they were doing. And I excused myself from that room, went back to the room where I'd made that disclosure and picked right up, them none the wiser that I'd related anything that I wasn't yet authorized to do. And down the road we went. That, fortunately, was about 30 years ago. I haven't done it since, and I learned from it. It will paralyze you when you're doing it, realizing that you have shared something that you're not supposed to share. There are 2 ways mediators can handle communications in caucuses. The first is that you say to everybody, whatever we talk about is free for me to talk to the other room about unless you, parties and lawyer, tell me not to do it. So everything is available for me to talk about except for that which you tell me not to. The other way is to say everything we talk about is confidential until you have told me it's okay to communicate that information. The second way is the way I have always done it. I don't think there is a right way and a wrong way. It's who's responsible for remembering things. And I want to take that obligation on myself. So I go the second way, which is whatever we talk about is confidential. I will ask for specific information to know what it is that you want shared, and will only share that. And we can talk some more about some mistakes in a moment if it looks like we get to it. There are instances where outside the box settlements are the way to get there. A case just simply can't get resolved in the regular way. How much money do you want? How much are you willing to pay? I'll pay some more. I need less. I'll pay some more. I'll take some less. We get to a settlement. There's the number. We write out the settlement agreement, and that's it. But there are times where creativity can really be brought into play to help find a solution. I'll give you an example. I had a mediation one time where the parties had determined, the defendant had determined that there was a 50-50 chance that the case would go their way at trial. They'd either win or they'd lose, about a 50-50 chance. And in fact, they'd either lose and have to pay $32,000 or they'd win and they'd pay $0. That was really all it was. Very methodical. The adjuster had been there for 35 years, was very astute about things and very convinced that he knew how to analyze the case. Personal injury case, the plaintiff is asking for, I think, $28,000. Got it finally down to about 23. The defendant is offering, I think, 18,000 at the point. And it was hanging up. Nobody was moving anymore. So I went back to the adjuster on the defense side to say, look, if we don't offer more money from your room to that room, this case isn't going to get settled. You said all day long this is a 50-50 chance. Would you be willing to flip a coin for the difference between 18,000 and the 23,000 that's asked? If you win the toss, you pay 18. If you lose the toss, you pay 23. And he thought about it for a minute and said, sure, I'm willing to do that. Those are the odds I have at the courthouse. Might as well save the time to go to trial. It's kind of the same thing. I'll do that. So I go back into the plaintiff's room where the young plaintiff's there, and I bring that up, that they'll agree to bridge the gap with a coin flip. And at that point, they got kind of intrigued by it. I thought, well, maybe a coin flip's a good idea, but what if we made it a little more on the top side and maybe make it 28,000 if they win the toss? So we're about to get into a negotiation over how much the toss would be worth. Went back to the defense room to talk to the adjuster and said they're okay with the concept. They would like to make the top number 28, not just 23. And he said, well, Ross, I'm not willing to do that anymore. And I said, well, I just got through talking to the other room. That seems a shame. I thought we had us a platform here that might work. He said, no, you don't understand. I want to flip a coin for the whole case. I have a 50-50 chance of winning the case. I'll pay 0 if I win at court. If I lose, I'm going to lose $32,000, and I'll have to pay that at the court. So I'd rather just flip a coin for the whole thing. Okay, go back to the plaintiff's room and explain that, and you would have thought I'd pulled fingernails out with pliers. The plaintiff was not at all ready to put the whole case on the line for a coin flip, even though that really was what the odds were at the courthouse. But it did break the logjam and allowed us to then find what does it take to come up with a acceptable solution in between. So even though the ultimate solution didn't include the coin flip on that one, it cracked the door open to where the case could have gotten settled, which it did for about $19,000 and change, I think it was, because it highlighted the risk was about 50-50 at trial. In the States, virtually all jurisdictions require that the settlement agreement be in writing. You don't just leave it orally, you leave it with some sort of writing of some kind so that you have a binding settlement. And then measuring your success, I would say to you, if you move away from a settlement rate based on the number of cases that you have settled, which by the way are none. As a mediator, we never settle a case, the parties settle a case. So taking credit for a settlement rate seems to be an anomaly. We don't really have that. What we really want is for people to feel as good as they can about the process, appreciate the resolution, and appreciate your hard work for having gotten there. And that's going to be how you build your practice. There's a phrase we have throughout America, as I mentioned, was "In God We Trust," that kind of highlights a number of different things in our country. But for mediation purposes, my point is this: if you keep everything in your head as the way to get things solved, it's going to be frustrating for you. What you should follow instead is your intuition or your gut instinct. It's guidance for those like me that believe that maybe God has a hand in what we do as mediators, whether it's a supreme being, whether it's a gut instinct, whatever that is, that's what you want to listen to, because that will guide you to doing the right thing at the right time, which isn't necessarily apparent to you in your brain, but something inside you tells you to try it. That's what you want to listen to, because that's going to be the direction that will get the parties to a solution. And let me end this portion of things with really a couple of stories. One is you may very well be familiar with. It's called Footprints in the Sand, and it picks up with what I'm talking about. One night, a man had a dream, and he dreamed he was walking along the beach with the Lord. And across the sky flashed scenes from his life. And for each scene, what he noticed, there were two sets of footprints in the sand. One belonged to him, and the other to the Lord. He got to the last scene of his life, and he looked back at all the footprints in the sand, and he noticed that many times along the way, there was only one set of footprints. And those always happened at the time when he was at the lowest point, the saddest point of his life. It bothered him. And so he questioned the Lord about it. And he said, Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I've noticed that during the most troublesome times of my life, there's only one set of footprints. And I don't understand why you would leave me at the time when I'm at the lowest. And the Lord replied, my precious, precious child, I love you. I would never leave you. During your times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. And that's to emphasize what I'm talking about. If we trust our instincts and trust our guidance that we have available to us, it will carry us to where we need to as mediators. And lastly, there were two men that met on a beach. One of them said, good evening, friend. What are you doing? And the second one said, I'm throwing these starfish back into the sea. If I don't, they'll die up here on the beach. So throwing starfish into the sea is what he was doing. And the first guy says, well, there's thousands of starfish on the beach. You can't possibly get to all of them. You can't possibly make a difference. And the second one smiled, picked up another starfish, threw it into the sea, and said, made a difference to that one. And that's what we are as mediators. We are one at a time, only one at a time, serving as a mediator in a mediation process that gives a chance to make a difference in people's lives. And we're blessed with that opportunity to do that. Well, I guess with that, may all your mediations be successful. May you make a difference in the lives of the people for whom you serve as a mediator. And I again want to thank you for the opportunity to share a bunch of these insights with you. And God bless you all, colleague. I've got you muted at the moment, Catherine.
Κατερίνα, το μικρόφωνο σου άνοιξε. Κατερίνα, το μικρόφωνο άνοιξε.
Hey, well,
Έχεις κλειστό
Catherine,
μικρόφωνο, Κατερίνα.
are you not able to get that released? Well, I tell you what I can do. I see a couple of chat questions here, and if you'd like for me to, I can go ahead and address those. There we got it. Yeah.
Here we are. Sergio did not allow me to unmute.
Oh.
Yes, it is true.
A very valuable button he has, not to do that.
So I want
That was a libel.
very much, Ross, for this presentation, this lecture, which was invaluable. Very, very interesting. and we learned a lot of things. I have many questions which I would like to put if time allows, but
Please.
first our colleagues will put their questions. There are some in the chat.
Yes.
So if you like to answer them.
So there is someone here who has questioned, what are the points from which we understand that we are leading them and not helping them? Can we let that person chime in and explain a little bit what they're asking?
May I help? May I help?
Yeah, no, I found it.
Good. Perfect.
Thank you. Many times in the mediation, I think like lawyer and not like mediator. So I believe that one of my mistake that I want to not to do again, it's I feel from my instinct that I try to help them, or I think that I want to help them, guide them for a solution right for both of sides. Already you said to us, and correctly, and I felt so bad for that, and I hear that it's not my role or my point to agree or not if they don't want this agreement or not. This I believe that it's until little difficult for understanding, because I believe in justice. I really want to help them, so I lose my role between the if I do not that it's correct, but I try to help them with unlikely role. That's my point. I do not understand if you understand that I want to say.
Yeah, I think our role is to help them get insights into options that they have. Where we do have to be careful is we don't adopt an insight or a path as the right way for them and force them on it or draw them onto it. I think our job is to help explain it, help enlighten them about it, so they make a free choice whether to go that way or not. And it's sometimes difficult because it may be the only way I see for them to get it done. But if they aren't prepared to adopt it themselves, I don't want to force them into it. We want them to recognize if they do settle the case, they settled it because they themselves concluded that was the settlement they want, not one that I have pushed on them.
At this point, and thank you for your passion. How can I understand that I lose this role? For example, how the point that I drive them and I don't help them. For example, there is some way. How can I understand? Can I understand that I lead them? I force them. If they are not reacting other way, I try to understand how to discipline myself in this way. This point, I can understand how they feel. I can understand what probably they want. It's maybe you characterize me like ego, but it's not. It's easy for me to understand, but it's very strong, the emotion to help them, and yes. I lose the point that I have got to discipline to this point in my mind and in my acting. I do not know if you understand that I want to say.
I think so. And I guess I'd even say take it outside of mediation, in just a relationship that you may have with someone. Let's say that you have a good friend, a girlfriend who has a relationship with a boyfriend or a spouse, and that relationship isn't working right. You may see for her, certain things that she could or should do, but you can't really take control of her and cause her to do it that way. She has to make her own determination of what to do. And I think it saddens us, because I could see for someone, if they will just do what I'm suggesting, I think they'll have a better, happier relationship. But I have to learn to release and know that I've done what I can do. I have opened my heart, my insights to them. They have to be able to make the conscious choice.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's a difficult spot. And we, in mediation, as you know, as mediators, we see that so many times for people. What they could do would probably promote their life better, but we have to
respect it.
Yeah. Do you ever watch wildlife on television? You know, like
Yes,
African wildlife? I'm fascinated with it.
Yes.
Because if you know, as a wildlife photographer, they may see this poor, innocent-looking cub about to be mauled by another animal. And at one hand, I'm sitting here thinking, well, I would drop my camera and go interfere with that and make it all better. And you have to know that as a wildlife photographer, their job is not to do that. It's to film it. It's to catch it as it happens. And that's kind of like what we have to do. We have to not interfere in it. We have to create an environment where perhaps they'll choose the smart move, we think, and perhaps they won't. And it's okay if they don't. It's their decision.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Certainly. Here's another question. How do we handle intense emotions during a session? And how do we help a party move from a fixed position when they are being persistent? Yes, we encounter lots and lots of intense emotions from people during sessions. I think we have to be a rock. We have to be the listener. We have to be there and let that occur. When I was a child, on television, there was a cartoon called Felix the Cat. This takes me back a long way, but there was Felix the Cat. And I'll never forget, as a kid, Felix the Cat was a, two-dimensional cartoon character the way they did them back then. None of the fancy stuff we have now. And I would see Felix, and he would be walking into this blast, and his whiskers would blow back, and his hair would blow back, and he would disappear in this cloud. And a few minutes later, he would be shuffling on the backside of the cloud, and he survived. And that's kind of what we have to do. We have to let the blast occur. We're the lightning rod for that, not a sponge. Our job is not to absorb all that negative energy. It's to let it go past us, through us, and dissipate, so that on the backside, hopefully, there is a little bit more calm and reflective nature of the person who's now ready to think, what is a solution? And the person who asked that, how do we help a party move from a fixed position when they are being persistent? Want to comment on that, Vicky?
Yes.
There you are. Good.
This is me. So first of all, I want to thank you for sharing with us all this lifetime wisdom, and it's been an amazing lecture. And thank you so much, because everything you said was really, really valuable. So what I'm facing very often is that because I'm having cases with family law, is that I have to deal with very strong emotions. The parties are very, 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 very emotional, and they are stuck on that, and it's really difficult to overpass this. And I was wondering, I have been wondering many times, if I have to deal with them, do I have to dive into their feelings? Do I have to overpass? Do I have to just listen? Or do I have to be more calm and making some questions from time to time?
Yeah. Maybe the example I could give, I grew up around horses. My father was a horseman. And what I learned about horses is if you ever have a horse step on your foot, you're standing by a horse and they inadvertently put a foot down on yours, your first reaction is to push against the horse. You got to push that 1,500-pound horse off of your foot quickly. That's what your first thought is. Unfortunately, what a horse will do when a human pushes on it, it will lean back into it, which makes it worse. It doesn't pick its foot up, it leans back to the push. And I bring that up because it's much like in mediation, we want to move people to a place where we know they can think better, but there is much resistance to that. There is a pushback that occurs. In Western fighting, we think pugilism or boxing, where you do this. And in Eastern Asia, they think differently. They don't think push against, they think draw that energy and move it around, like Aikido or Tai Chi. That's kind of what I've encountered with people in mediation. If I push on them to get them there, they will push back and they won't go. I have to find a way to draw that energy out through conversation, through venting, to let them go do whatever they need to do in order to then find ourselves over here.
So this might take a long time sometimes.
It does, yeah. And the more
It happened to me, having a person confessing and talking about his feeling for 2.5 hours, and the other person just listening. And I was wondering, what did I have to do? Do I have to stop him? It was an awkward moment for me.
Well, and here's what I find is that I need to permit them to have the time that they need until they start repeating themselves. That's when I'll then interject. It's like, I think we've already covered that ground, Mr. Jones.
Yes,
Ms.
yes,
Jones.
very clearly. Yes, exactly.
So let us adjust our thinking over to here.
Okay.
But that may be an hour and a half into it before they really start to repeat. I've had a number of cases where I've gone into a room, I've asked one question, and 2 hours later, I take a break and come out of the room. Literally asked one question. There was that much emotion behind what had to be said. And I've made the decision to let it go on. When there is a momentary break, I may excuse myself to go to the other room to tell them, listen, this is taking longer than I thought, but I need to let this person go through the rest of the story. I'm going to go back in, but just to give you a heads up.
Yes. So the two questions are related because sometimes a party is very attached to a position and doesn't want to move. This has to do with the interests, of course, and sometimes with what they really need. That we said about this, but sometimes they don't want to negotiate and they don't want to move a step from their initial position. And that's a problem because even though you keep asking them, let's go, they keep standing on their first statement.
Yeah. Well, and some people don't want to settle. And particularly in your arena with the family law, there are people that don't want a divorce. They don't want it to get resolved. They don't want an answer. They just want it to fight. And
this is true.
It's not necessarily going to change in the course of the session. There are times when people will hang on to a position until you say, I think we're at a point where we need to stop the mediation because I can see we aren't getting somewhere. If you want us to stop, that's probably what we're going to have to do now. If you really do want to find if there's a solution, then we're going to have to figure out in the next couple of minutes, how do we do something different? It's what we would call somebody's bluff. By that, I mean, if they're being in the way on purpose, they don't know necessarily when to quit playing. You may have to say to them, we have to quit playing. And we're either going to stop the process and let something happen, or it's time to shift.
Use a break or something like that, so we can change the atmosphere. Exactly. Thank you very much.
Well, certainly. Let's see this one. On several occasions, I've noticed that lawyers can be more rigid during mediation than the parties themselves. Yeah. How can you ensure the mediation process stays on track, especially when the parties are open to settling, but the lawyers are more resistant? It looks like that's a worldwide problem. It can happen anywhere. There are times that the lawyers don't want to quit fighting, or believe so strongly that they should win the case for their client that they don't want the client to compromise. Usually what I do in those circumstances is I try to get the parties themselves talking more in the session, so that the parties are the ones who are answering my questions. We have some lawyers in the States who prefer that the mediator only ask the lawyer questions, only get answers from the lawyer. They've told their client to be quiet. So as mediators, what we can do is learn to think about what question would only the client know the answer to. So for example, a case may be about a personal injury somewhere, but you might ask the plaintiff, the injured party, what do they want the money for? Or you understand that they didn't finish college and would like to go back if they had some money. What college are they interested in? The lawyer's not going to know that, the client would. And sometimes that's a doorway for the client to start to talk that otherwise the lawyer's not letting them. Anything else on that one from somebody?
There is one question from Evie. During the negotiation phase, is it safer for mediator to keep private notes to ensure he transfer offers accurately between the parties? That's from Evie.
From Evie. Hello, Evie, by the way. Hello.
At 8:21.
Yes. I take lots of notes along the way. And many mediators destroy them at the end of the mediation session. A number of the cases I work on will go beyond the first day, so I tend to retain my notes as a reference to me as we go along. In our jurisdiction, notes are considered private notes, not subject to subpoena. So we're not worried about those getting out to the other party. One of the things we always tell mediators, when you're walking from room to room and you have your notebook with your notes on it, always close your notebook when you leave one room before you go into another one. Or if you're going to lay your notebook down, lay it face down so that your notes are not shared by whoever walks by. I've seen situations where a mediator just leaves it sitting on a table and they're open for anybody to look at, just going back and forth between rooms.
And there is one more from Mandy Maleviti. Is there neutrality in your opinion or just impartiality?
Yeah. Mandy, can you comment on that for a second? Can we liven her up?
Let's see if she's here.
Okay.
Yes, she's here. Mandy?
Mute. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Here I am. Hi.
Hi. I love the question.
I'm very interested in this because it's something that makes us feel uncomfortable sometimes. But it's that quote that if there is an elephant
in the room,
yes, and the mice, we have to take the part. But please tell me, I don't want to.
Well, one thing I would say, it is inaccurate, not accurate, to say that we are not biased or that we have bias. I have no biases. That would be not accurate. This whole concept of implicit bias is alive and well in all of us. We just have it. We can be cognizant that we want to push back against it, but we have it. So is there a difference between neutrality and impartiality in terms of how we show up? I don't know. I know that I have to give the impression to people. Their sense of me has to be I am impartial. And that's difficult when you have someone, for example, in one room that you really don't like. They are just obnoxious people. Occasionally you can have someone that is unpleasant. And when we're talking to mediators, we talk about how you have to work just as hard for that person, even though you really don't like the way they're showing up. But I have to go to bat for them exactly like I do this person in the other room. And that's difficult.
Yes.
It's hard.
Yes.
But we have to do it.
Yes.
And I have had a number of cases where I've come back going, gosh, I wish they'd have negotiated this differently, because I wish that guy didn't get everything he just got.
Yes.
But I worked just as hard for him as I did for her over here. And that's my role. That was my job.
It's the biggest challenge I've faced.
Yeah.
And I have to say the satisfaction I have every time I manage to do that is incredible, because I really feel that this is the role, this is the freedom, the respect, and all this idea of mediation is so great, but so difficult.
It's challenging. It really is.
Yes.
Well, and for those of y'all that do family law mediations, I've only done a few, but I pretty much realized that's a world unto itself. For those of you that are professionals that are able to work in that every day, God bless you. I don't know how you do it. The closest I come is in with probate or succession, where families are fighting over not their pot of money, but somebody else's pot of money. But it is extraordinarily challenging in the family arena to not dislike somebody more than somebody else. You just will.
Thank you.
Certainly.
It is very encouraging that you face the same difficulties like we, younger and less experienced.
Yeah.
Very honest. Thank you.
And it's all about getting the experiences. Each one is a new experience that we have a chance to learn from. Sometimes it's because we make mistakes. We want to learn not to make those again. Sometimes it's because we do it just right the first time. And we're proud of that. We just have to remember we were guided correctly on that one. Now let's hope it happens again on the next one.
Yes, and what we trigger is what we find difficulties inside ourselves.
Yeah. You get in touch with a lot of feelings about people when you're doing this job.
Yes. Thank you.
Certainly. Sergio, anything else there? This one says, you've experienced a huge number of negotiation ways and styles. What's the best attitude for parties and lawyers to finish the day with a successful settlement? Yeah, Georges, you want to explain that a little bit? Let's see if Georges is here. Yep. Are you there, Georges? See if we can we unmute him? Let's see if there was anything else. Anything else you see there, Sergio? got you muted at the moment.
Σέργιο, γιατί δεν μπορεί να μπει ο Σάββαλος?
I think I just lost Georgios. Or Sergio's.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
There we go.
No, there is no other question. I
Okay.
think the question of George goes about the best negotiation style.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I think his question is, which is the best negotiation style to your point of view? Maybe this is what he means.
Best attitude for parties and lawyers to finish the day.
I think by attitude he means the style, the negotiation.
The style?
Γιατί δεν έρχεται στην οθόνη να εξηγήσει?
Προφανώς έχει βγει.
Yeah, I don't know that there is, a particular one. Obviously, if they come in open to sharing information that they have and listening to what the other party says, that's what we want them to do, because we can maybe move things if they'll just have insight into risk that they otherwise don't. If they come in thinking they know all the answers and they're not going to share anything or hear anything, it's going to be a long day. That's going to be really tough for us to get to some place where they can settle the case.
I have a question.
Sure.
We have a lawsuit. What is the best timing to start a mediation?
The best timing in a case?
Yes.
I think it's as early as you can possibly get the parties willing to do it. Mm-hmm. And in our country, the reason for that is because litigation is so expensive. The sooner we can get them to talking about settlement, likely the better. Even if the case can't settle because it's too early, we can then help them figure out, of all the things left to be done, what's the one or two or three things that might change somebody's view? Let's go just do that. Not the 20 things that are ahead, but let's just do the 3 things that might make a difference, and then we'll pick up with the discussions. So we have a significant number of cases that are what we call pre-suit. There's no litigation filed, but people are willing to come in and see if they can get things settled earlier. And that's very cost effective for them if they can do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There is a question from Jenny. Can you see it?
Oh, at the very end here. Yeah, when these.
Says, when the issues are not simply financial, but more complicated, should there be a presentation of the various options?
And Jenny, by that, do you mean a presentation by the lawyers?
Just a minute. Jenny?
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
We're good.
On many occasions, the differences are not simply financial, mm-hmm. because the financial aspect, it's either, some, it's a certain problem about the amounts that they have
right.
to be distributed, agreed, or whatever.
Right.
But especially in Greece, we have many complicated issues because they involve also families, properties, participations, relations. So it's not a simple issue to go through a mediation when all these issues cannot be brought on the table. Mm-hmm. In such cases, in order to be able to make some progress, should there be a preparation for the aspects of consideration representing the views of the parties involved, so that they may make compromises either on the finances or the properties or the relations, because otherwise they will never get anywhere through mediation.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a number of cases where we ask the parties through their lawyers to exchange information lists of what they think are in play. This is particularly true like in a probate matter of a large estate. There may be many, many dollars involved and lots of different pieces of the puzzle. We're trying to get our hands around what are the universe of possible things to be traded. And that being done in advance can be very helpful. Otherwise, what you end up with is doing that in the first day of the mediation, recessing the mediation to then go have a time to put all that together and come back for a second time. Much more efficient to do it at the front end if you can get the parties to do it.
Yes, I think so, because otherwise there will be just arguing and creating a worse atmosphere than the one they started.
That they started with, yeah. And to me, that's one of the intriguing things about complex cases is the opportunity for creativity in the solution. Because there's so many different pieces, you can sometimes help them see where if they would give this piece up, they might be able to get this piece over here that they really want. But we have to know what the list is. What are the possibles?
But your presentation was wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I'm very happy that I am able to participate.
Well, good. Well, I'm delighted that you were able to come and join us and at least see one perspective on things. Well, if we may, I'm going to need to run into my office from here in order to start a mediation this afternoon of folks that have not exchanged a list yet. So we're going to have to see what they're capable of doing. But I very much appreciate the opportunity to share this with you, and look forward to perhaps doing this again sometime.
We thank you very much again, Ross, for this tremendous speech you have done to us, for all the information we have got. I believe that we are able now to become better mediators. It is the third time you are in Greece, but this time it is online.
I know. Not as much fun. Not as much fun.
You have been twice in person, but
three times. Three times.
3 times in person?
Yep. Many years ago through the islands and Athens, back, this is, 25 years ago. But not through mediation, just to visit. Yeah.
So I cannot complain.
That's right.
You have been twice in Thessaloniki and never in Athens. Next time, I hope that you will be in Athens. Of course, I hope that you will continue participating actively as you have done to the Mediation Festival, being a part of the organizing committee, and you have done it in a very nice way. It was wonderful. And in general, the festival was a very good idea of Evie.
Yes.
And I hope she will repeat this festival, and that you will be again a member of the organizing committee. But I do hope that you will be in Athens also.
We shall do that.
Yes, we will arrange this, I'm sure. And I thank you again once more. Thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome.
And I wish you all the best. God bless you and your family.
Thank you so much, and to you all as well. And my prayers are in place that mediation will continue to grow throughout Greece. It needs to, and my prayer is with you that will happen.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, folks. Thank you for the evening together. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Have a successful mediation.